Do you remember what your hands can do? Grab a needle and thread, and let's sew together. In this tutorial, we're going to be doing a flat felled seam. The seam is actually stitched together with a running back stitch, and then the fold is folded over and felled into place. This is the type of seam that you see on 18th century shifts and shirts. It makes a beautiful seam for doing any kind of unlined modern work. So grab your needle and thread and fabric in your hands and let's get sewing. So to begin, we are going to actually do a stitching line, 1/4 of an inch away from this offset edge. What that will do is stitch the right sides together and join the material so that once we're done with that, we can actually open this up and then these raw edges are going to get folded and then this will get stitched down. To start our felled seam, we're going to offset our fabric. So if you offset this 1/4 of an inch, we're going to be then doing a stitching line 1/4 of an inch down, meaning that this under fabric has been taken up in seam allowance 1/2 of an inch. And once we're done stitching, we're actually going to fold this raw edge over and once again open it up and then fold it over again. And so that will also take up 1/2 an inch, a little over a centimeter. So we're going to measure down 1/4 of an inch or about 5/8 of a centimeter, and we're going to stitch. I'm going to do this by eye, but if you're new to this, what I would recommend doing is measure down and then draw a straight line because this is all going to be encased. And so if there's pencil or some sort of marking, there's no worry there. However, I'm going to do it by eye just because of my own experience. I'm going to dip this needle down in the fabric, come up again like I'm doing a running stitch, drop down to the fabric and come up again. So I'm doing about 2 stitches to begin. Pull that through, the knot locks it in place, and then I'm going to do a little back stitch. Of course, I'm starting on the right side if I'm right-handed and the left side if I'm left-handed, stitching right to left or left to right. I'm going to do about 3 or 4 stitches of a running stitch before I do another back stitch. So this is the same technique that we used in the video of where I showed you how to do a running back stitch. If you need a refresher, pause this video and go back and practice your running back stitch and then come back and we'll finish the felling seam. So you're just going to continue to sew all the way down the line to attach these pieces of fabric together. And when you come to the end of the work, go ahead and do a back stitch and then take another stitch, create that loop like we've done before, put your needle through the fabric twice and pull that nice and taut. This is going to be on the interior, so it doesn't matter what this looks like, but I still like to go back and put my needle parallel to the work and just kind of hide that thread. And then you snip it off. Now that we have stitched our fabric together, we now need to make this raw edge disappear. So we need to turn this up and baste it. What's great about the fact that we've already staggered these edges is that, like the hem that we've done before, this raw edge acts as a gauge, so it's really easy just to fold this over and baste that in place. And if you need help remembering how to baste, I also have a video in the tutorial section of how to baste. But since you already know how to do a running stitch and back stitch, I think you're probably pretty good about basting. So I'm just going to fold this up and use thread that I don't really care about to baste. Just going to do some really big stitches just to temporarily hold that fabric in place. And as you come to the end of the work, you can do a back stitch going back to the stitch you just did, jumping ahead of that tail, and then just locking that in place, just temporarily, and then you can snip this off. So here we have our basted up raw edge. So now we have a nice clean edge with which we can then fold up. So we've basted up our raw edge. Now comes a part that some people get tripped up on. Now is when we actually want to open up our fabric and put the right sides touching the table. So the wrong side is what's facing us. So we're going to open this up, and you can, if this is linen, you can actually just finger press this down. If it's a little bit more of a finicky fabric, you may want to actually use an iron. But linen, you can see here, I've just pressed it and it immediately actually is flat, which is pretty amazing. What's very important is you make sure that it is pressed to the seam line. So this is very open and very flat. So now you can really see this flat felled seam coming together. So if we look at the cross section of it, it's actually getting ready to lie flat. This is the outside. So this is where the seam line is going to be, and then you're going to see top stitching coming through. And then this is the interior. So the next step is to take this fold and fell it to this fabric. To fell this fold down to this fabric, we're using the same technique that we've done to hem. So I'm going to put my needle just a yarn away from the fold, coming through the fold here, locking that knot in place. If you're left-handed, you're going to be stitching left to right. As a right-hander, you'll be stitching right to left. And we're going to dip our needle just to the left of this tail and a little down if we're right-handed, or just to the right of this tail and a little down if we're left-handed. Pushing that needle down and then popping it back up through that fold, again, about a yarn width away from the edge. So there's our first stitch. And then we're going to repeat that. I'm using my non-dominant hand to actually sandwich this fold down. So I've got my middle finger underneath here, stabilizing the work, and then I've got my thumb squashing that fold down. And then my dominant hand is coming up behind and then felling this into place. If you need some practice with your felling, I do have a video that's about hemming and felling. And felling is like felling a tree. We are folding something down. Something is fallen down, like felling a tree. Whereas hemming is when we're finishing off the edge. So we're felling this fold, hence a flat felled seam. So my needle is dipping down in the material, and then at the same time, it's rocking back up through that fold. Needle is mostly parallel to the work. The work is parallel to my body. My hands are relaxed. The table, my lap, or a pillow is whatever you have your hands on is what is stabilizing the work. We're going to stitch roughly 8 to 10 stitches to the inch, or about 8 to 10 stitches every 2.5 centimeters. This is what the other side looks like. So just little tiny stitches. And then when you're ready to knot off, we're going to take a little stitch, like a little bite in the fabric, make a loop, and go through this loop twice, pull this nice and taut, and then I'm going to take my needle and pass it in between the layers of this fold and the fabric, pulling that so that knot is hidden and it looks more like a stitch. And once you're done stitching this, all you have to do is just take out your basting. So this is the interior of where you've done your running backstitch and then felling that fold into place. And then again, the underside, which looks like this, little top stitches. And then this is the cross section of the seam. It's very, very flat. So I like doing this on shifts, shirts, unlined clothes. It's super strong and it looks really cool if you're doing modern clothing, especially if you use contrasting thread. I hope that sewing along with me is helping you to remember what your hands can do. Happy sewing, everyone.